All right, welcome to the Grow Podcast. It's 10:18 here. We're in the throes of harvest. We're gonna always do as we always do in the Grow Podcast. We're gonna have a segment here to kind of start off that I'm gonna give you a market update on what's happening in the market today, from inputs, what we're seeing, and then even today I'm gonna talk a little bit about all of our building projects that we've had going on and that we're still in construction with. And then we're going to transition to having our agronomic team with Dan and Brad on to really talk about what they're seeing now as we're getting yield results out there. We're seeing some of the struggles that we had over the summer really start to show up in those results. And I'm going to get out of their way and let them really have their way with it instead of kind of moderating it and let them be really raw on what they're telling you guys with what they're seeing. So when we look at the market update and what's happening in the markets today from the overall just agronomy picture, I think there's two or three key things that really stick out to me. Is one, for those out there that haven't marketed any D's 24 corn, when you're looking at that, and I would say the overall pretty above average yields, or at least above expectation yields we're seeing on corn. I think this morning it was trading for $5.18 on the board. Those are some things I would be looking at taking a stab at with laying off 5 to 10% of that new crop risk on the inputs that you're buying today and putting to the ground. With everything we're seeing in the market, those are some good targets to have today, and look at working some offers even at some higher prices for another 5 to 10% that you could sell. So that's the first plug I'm going to make on when I'm thinking about what I'm doing for my strategy right now on my overall hedging my crop inputs. That's one I would be looking at. Looking at the rest of the fertilizer market, the biggest thing I would say today is, we're obviously, it's very unfortunate what we're seeing happen in the Middle East, in Israel, with a lot of the tensions that's happening. That is going to be a big factor to continue to watch over the next few months. There's a lot of players in that market from a standpoint of who is supporting who, who's backing who, and as that whole conflict escalates, if there's added people or there's added conflict throughout the Middle East, and we continue to see the reaction to gas prices, primarily oil or natural gas, those things are going to affect what's happening in the overall market from total fertilizer nitrogen prices. Also one thing to think about too is, there's a vast majority of urea produced in the Arab Gulf, in that whole region in the Middle East. So any time we have a conflict over there, especially in what we're seeing right now, it's going to have some kind of a negative effect in regards to supply or overall international tensions. So, again, very unfortunate what's happening over there. It's something to definitely keep an eye on from the standpoint of, what's happening, who is escalating tensions, is there a drawdown in tensions, just overall anything that continues to happen is going to be somewhat of a situation that is going to influence nitrogen prices as we go forward. So that's the biggest thing I would say is as a watch out. Last week when we saw the tensions begin to rise, we did see a $5 to $8 increase in Dutch or European gas prices overnight. Again, there's a lot of risk premium that's being put in with now we have a war in Ukraine and a conflict in the Middle East again. So when you look at the total supply of energy coming from both the Middle East and Russia, now you have a conflict in both scenarios, with the ongoing war in Ukraine. Those are things that are going to continue to influence what we're seeing in overall nitrogen prices globally, and it will have a net effect on us here domestically. So, when we think about where corn price is today and where it has been traditionally, I don't know what anybody's opinion is today on what I would call our new crop that we're taking off, but obviously with yields a little bit better, it'll be interesting to see how that transition is throughout. We have a slight carry in the market today, but does that hold? Are we able to maintain prices over $5 on the carry? If we don't, a lot of growers are going to be looking for price reprieve in nitrogen prices. And today, with where we're at globally with the conflicts that are happening and supply, I think it's going to be tough. I think we have a really firm floor put in the prices. You look back to last spring where we started, or call it last prepay season where we started prices at. I mean, we're still nowhere near that. The downside potential was significant. Now where we're at, I'm not saying that there's a bunch of upside, but there's probably more upside than there is downside from where we're at today. I think with a lot of what's going on just globally, there's not enough supply out there to really affect in a negative way. And I'd say the next biggest thing with that, from an overall supply standpoint, is really looking at China. The last month or two, we've had a couple rounds of Indian urea tenders, and both of those tenders have, I'm going to say, kind of not really, they flamed out and haven't been a big deal in the market. Not a lot of supply has been bought, but it's been enough to balance the market. The Chinese government's came out since, I would say, the first one and really said, hey, we're not going to be a supplier globally of urea. We're getting into this time period where we're going to need to conserve energy. We're going to be mandating certain export duties on urea leaving the country. And, again, that was a pretty big lift to the urea market, looking at the amount of demand that still needs to come from India and knowing that China wasn't going to be able to supply it. Like anything that comes from the Chinese government, it's hard to believe. And since then, we've really transitioned into a time where the market's not sure on how much supply is really going to come from China. And it continues to lean a little bit closer to that we're going to have more supply than what everybody thought. So there's a tender that will close the end of the week here for urea into India. And we'll see really what happens and how much supply comes from China. I would say if it's an over-exaggerated amount of urea that does come from China, that's pretty bearish in the overall global urea market. But I don't think it's a point where it's really going to catapult it higher either. I think the biggest thing, again, to keep a watch out on is really what happens in the Middle East, and then really what is China's influence in the overall global urea market. If tensions settle down in the Middle East and China continues to export urea and supply the market, I think we have a very balanced market to the point that we're not going to see a lot of big shifts in prices. If we have an escalated conflict and we have limited exports from China into the urea market, we could see some pretty fast and aggressive changing prices. So I know that's about as clear as mud, if I'm a grower trying to take some advice on that. But I think the biggest thing to be mindful of is it's a very fluid situation. Make sure you're tuning in and listening to the updates. Calling the Grow Solutions Center to ask for information. Calling your local account lead to ask for information on what the markets are doing, especially if you haven't locked in all of your needs. When you look to the dry market, the biggest thing that still remains a struggle today for the U.S. market is phosphate supply. I can tell you today on October 18th, I'm feeling phosphate supply more than probably I have in a few years. There's been some downtime at some of the domestic plants. We've had very limited overall MAP imports domestically. The river system is not working worth the crap. We just haven't had a lot of things that have worked our way in the standpoint of being able to have really adequate or consistent phosphate supply domestically. A lot of this still has to do with the fact that Moroccan imports of phosphate are not allowed here in the United States or heavily dutied. Again, that is back at the Department of Commerce and International Trade Committee to figure out where that goes long term. So we'll see what happens there. My stance on it is when you look at the overall global market for phosphate supply long term, Morocco has more or less the majority of the supply globally for the next 500 years. You look at production that we're producing annually as a domestic market. Every year we produce less as a U.S. domestic market, and we still continue to export products. So at some point, we're going to have to take and look at this a little bit differently and understand that, we have to be able to open up ourselves for a little bit more phosphate import to really supply the U.S. farmer. You look at price differentials between Brazil and the U.S. today. The Brazilian farmer's paying anywhere from $50 to $150 less on phosphate prices per ton. And you look at what we're having from a standpoint of a currency exchange versus them on export bean prices. What's happening in the phosphate market today is just making the Brazilian farmer more competitive than the U.S. farmer. And we have to get some change into that to where it's a little bit more even playing field. The Chinese consumer, the global consumer of beans doesn't care if it's Brazilian or it's U.S. They want beans. They're looking for something, they're looking for a commodity. Now, they will pay us a premium from the standpoint of logistics success, ability to get it from us and whatnot, but that's only to a certain degree. So, in the phosphate market in general, we've got a lot of soul searching to do as a total market of being able to bring back consistent supply to the market. And obviously, with those things being back into their relative government channels, we'll see what happens. I do think there's going to be some reprieve to the overall Moroccan duties, just due to what we're seeing in price differentials globally. Looking at potash, I can tell you right now, potash is very flat. Production, I would say supply and consumption are very balanced. And, I think we can continue to see that throughout the fall and spring, that there's not going to be any wild price swings in those products. Everything is kind of working as is, with what we're seeing from consumption and production. Moving on to the chemicals. The biggest thing I can tell everybody to be on the watch out from Landus, whether you're a new customer or an existing customer, the first week of November, we will have our crop protection prices launched. You'll be able to start working on your programs with either your local account lead or your growth solution specialist. On that, the biggest highlights I would say from looking at prices today, there's been huge price reduction in the following products: anything that has metallochlor, 2,4-D, but not including in list, glyphosate, glufosinate, including Liberty, clethodim, and generic fungicides, and generic insecticides. Those kind of branches, or I'm going to call it buckets of products, have seen significant decreases year over year in prices. Again, there's been a ton of channel supply that we've seen, both from manufacturers, distributors, and even retailers, where people just weren't, when we go back to the COVID era of supply situation and really trying to make sure we had consistent supply, people loaded up, had long inventory, planned on the carry, planned on, possession was 9/10 of the law. Like any good market, when things get too high, people step in, find a way to manufacture products and create margin. And we've had a huge reduction in prices due to that, with overall tech supply, finished goods supply, and it's really been a complete wipeout of the market. So we're resetting back to where a lot of these prices were when we had $3 corn, and probably very consistent pricing here for the next 12 months on those products where I don't see there's any, unless we have major production issues or something crazy that were to happen in the market from a raw ingredient standpoint or a finished good product standpoint. Those prices are going to remain pretty consistent until we really have channel consumption happen and really clear a lot of this inventory to get to the point where retailers don't have much inventory, growers don't have much inventory, distributors don't have much inventory, and a lot of that's going to come on the back of production controls. One thing, I would say from a pricing standpoint on branded prices, there's really not a difference in branded prices year over year, other than I would say glyphosate and glufosinate prices. We've seen those prices from branded manufacturers really kind of step back. We saw Bayer have some pretty significant glyphosate price decreases. They've recently taken a small price increase. We've seen BASF come forward with a pretty significant price decrease on Liberty. So all these things included, we've seen a lot of price decreases on, I would call it your mainstay commodity products. But in general, I'd say branded products are pretty flat to a slight increase. And, they're still talking of December type price increases as well. I don't think that will really materialize from a broad spectrum of the market, but, I think everything's going to be pretty flat from where we've increased today. The last thing I would say too is on the chemical side is there are great opportunities to save money while still having a very premium program from the chemical standpoint. I think the biggest thing as a grower this year is you have to really work with your trusted advisor to figure out what that mix is and how you attack your overall herbicide programs from that. So be talking with your trusted advisor on who is providing you a lot of these recommendations on your overall herbicide programs, and give us a call, and we can find a way to get you to a really cost-effective price per acre, as well as being able to add premium nutritionals, premium products along with it that are getting you to a price per acre that is very affordable compared to what we've seen for the last few years. And finally, I wanted to update everybody a little bit on the projects that we've had going on here at Landus. Again, I know for all those that are customers of us or that follow us, we're constantly posting about the new the money that we've invested back into rural Iowa and rural America here. From an agronomy standpoint, the biggest things that I want to point out is we've talked about anybody driving on 80 to Des Moines from Illinois can see our Mitchellville facility. It's pretty well finished and recapped and wrapped up. So we've had that for about a year now. We just put the final stitches on our Rake liquid building, which is going to be a state-of-the-art liquid building for the local business at Rake. And for those customers up there that are going to be looking at using that this spring, we're going to have an open house this winter to bring you in and show you the technology that we put in that facility. And for any of those that follow us on our YouTube, we're also going to have a YouTube video here in the next few months on just kind of going through that building and what it looks like and what we're trying to really document and demonstrate here at Landus as a premier provider locally of crop protection products and liquid fertilizer products. So be looking for that. We're putting kind of the final bows on our Jefferson seed treatment site, and that'll be another one. If anybody remembers back to the podcast, I think we did it in May, where we were in the Jefferson warehouse while they were working on getting all the equipment out of there. We'll be able to kind of show you the before and after pictures of what that looks like from the standpoint of what we took out of there to get that project to where it is today. And we're very excited to be able to really service not only central Iowa around Jefferson, but really more of Iowa with treated soybeans, premium treated soybeans offered from us and really logistically centered out of that facility. And really probably the most exciting one for us is our current Boone facility being built today. Again, those that follow us and that saw that our grant that was awarded from the USDA on that project, that's going to be our manufacturing and distribution site really for the whole Midwest region, and especially in central Iowa. And what we're going to do there is we're going to be manufacturing a lot of our own proprietary products and really focusing on what works for us, for our growers that we deal with, as well as making specialized blends for whatever they may need on their farm. It's a 75,000 square foot warehouse, and it's going to be fully automated 24/7. And we've posted some stuff out on our Twitter on some of the updates, so continue to look for that. And I would expect this winter or this spring we're going to be in there for one of the podcasts as well, really going through that and showing everybody what our capabilities are there. And it's truly going to be a one-of-a-kind facility here in the Midwest. And then after that, we're building another very similar plant to what we built at Rake in early Iowa. Again, state-of-the-art automation, very fast, very efficient for those local growers. And then we're also doing some small tweaks at a few of our facilities where we're just increasing the capacity. Our Bayard facility that's needed a little TLC on the loadout capabilities, we're upgrading the automation there and implementing some equipment that will help us load out quite a bit faster. For those of you around there that don't enjoy the long lines in season, we're definitely fixing that problem. And then upgrading our dike facility to have two fully automated hot load bays. So with that, obviously, again, we're really beginning to continue to invest in our overall agronomy business here at Landus. And it's not possible without the pull through from our customers, and we do appreciate that. And as always appreciate your business. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan and Brad to really give you guys a really good look at what they've been seeing in the field. We've had a very exciting year from the overall agronomic team on what we're finding out there that's really going to make a difference in our overall strategy for how we place products this winter. So they've got a bunch of good information, and I know you'll look forward to hearing from them. As always, thank you for your business and support of Landus.
Thanks, John. Dan?
Brad, it's been an interesting year.
It has been an interesting year.
Let's talk about what we've seen with genetics. Let's talk about corn first. You've been flying the drones. You've been looking at a lot of different plots, and I've been out counting, doing stand counts, and counting how many plants are going over when you do the push test. And what I've seen with genetics so far, if I was just going to do one big macro view of it, is that this year plant health really paid the dividends.
It did. One of the real interesting things we did this year with the camera that we have on one of our drones, which captures infrared and near infrared imagery, is looking at those hybrids in the plots, especially under the dry stress conditions that we had. And it was amazing to look across 15 and 20 and 25 varieties in a plot and see how those hybrids reacted in those really dry stress type environments.
We don't have the ability to do it yet, but later on, when we do some meetings, we'll look at some of the corresponding yields that we took out and some of those images, because I've been looking at some of those in the plots, and where we had some of the higher yields, you could see there was difference in the consistency and the way those drone shots looked. From a yield standpoint, it's been all over the board. We have some plots and some field comparisons where we had more rain, like in the Boone County area, where we've had yields up in the 260s and 270s. What I found is overall, this has been a very good year for Brevant hybrids again. And obviously, there are a lot of different choices that people have to make, but we've seen some tremendous performance from the early maturities all the way to the fuller season maturities. And what I'm noticing when I was out doing evaluations in plots, the plant health is impeccable with the Brevant program.
Yeah. Well, and one thing dry conditions teaches you is you really start to learn where you have opportunities for improvement. For example, we were talking about the plant health and we talk about plant stress, especially under dry conditions. Think about potassium, where we had fields and growers that have really put more emphasis into getting fertility levels up and, more importantly, balanced. We really saw that pay big dividends this year, especially when it comes to the plant health. We think about the role that the nutrients play in that plant's development, potassium being one of those really critical nutrients in water absorption and plant stress, and just the functionality that potassium plays in that plant life cycle. And then when you come in with the products that have, for lack of a better term, a bigger sponge underneath them, so they're able to more efficiently absorb water and nutrients. Under the dry, drought stress type conditions that we had this year, we really started to see those shine and really start to separate themselves across a lot of different environments.
My 3 words going forward when we're looking at corn selection for 2024, guys, is diversity, diversity, diversity. And if you're planting just one style, you need to make sure that you're diversified. Obviously, we've been talking about Brevant because after 45 years in the business, I just don't like tripping over corn when I'm walking in fields. And I like corn. Brad, we've talked about the fact that, and we're going to talk about fertility in a minute here, but when you look at yields, there are a lot of good yielding products, and multiple companies have good yielding products. So I want to take those good yielding products and I want them to stand. And plant health is one aspect to it, obviously using fungicides as another aspect to it. But we're finding good yields in the areas, like we said, in that 260, 270, where in other areas where it was a little bit more stressed, and you're still seeing those good plant health products that are yielding near the top.
Yeah, definitely makes a big difference.
Now, when it comes to soybeans, we've had enough commentary on the virtual agronomist. This year, it's all been about peaking source of resistance for soybean cyst nematode. There were a lot of stresses out here with soybeans, but number one stress I saw in evaluating fields, 9 out of 10 fields that we would take and dig up roots on soybeans and look for cysts, we were able to find them, which is extremely high percentage. We saw yellow fields where some areas where the pH was high. There was obviously maybe some corn carryover in some situations. What did you see as you were looking at some of the soybean fields?
Well, again, taking the drone with the spectral camera on it over some of the soybean plots, it was amazing looking at the differentiation of those varieties from the stress conditions. And even in Boone County at our Farnville Research Farm, where we have 28 different varieties in one plot, you could, to the row, pick out those varieties that were taking the drier stress type conditions better. Is it surprising that the ones that were showing the best plant health happen to have Peking type resistance in them? I really don't think so. If we think about the soybean cyst nematode, how it functions in that plant, think of high cholesterol. You restrict the blood vessel, you can't get as much blood flow through, and you usually end up getting put on high blood pressure medication by your doctor. Soybean cyst nematode essentially acts the same in a soybean plant. That cyst gets in there, and that microscopic worm gets into that root, and it essentially restricts that root's ability to move nutrients and water up and down through that plant and to feed that plant. So when you get those dry conditions and then nutrient availability becomes a bit more of a challenge to get the nutrients and the water into the plant, it just becomes a compounding effect. So I think there's truly something going on there that we really need to address. The PI 788's been around for many, many decades. And if we've learned anything over the years, Mother Nature always seems to adapt. This may be that point in time where the PI 788 resistance has kind of run its course. Mother Nature has adapted to all the different races that are out there to the point where it's just not giving us the level of protection that we really need.
Well, we're seeing a lot of data coming in from the Landus plots. Also, in talking to one of our colleagues, Dave Lemke, in the Farnville Gowrie area, Dave was telling me that, of course, there's a sampling, but there were several thousand acres that have come out now in his area, and as he's keeping track, his evaluation is there's probably about a 5 to 7 bushel advantage in the farmers who were planting Peking versus the PA88. So guys, if you weren't happy with your soybean yields, you got to take a look at the new Peking varieties. And we are going to have series of meetings after harvest is over, after when there's a little bit more time, and we'll be talking about the whys. It wasn't just cysts. There were several stresses with beans. We had gall midge flying around and causing some challenges that we haven't seen before. We still had a sudden death syndrome showing up, and we had some of these others. I think what we need to do is we need to set a goal to make soybeans interesting for most of us. Is we need to go and start looking at field averages like the Illinois boys do. Let's start going for 80 bushels instead of being satisfied with 50 to 60 or farming for 50 to 60. I think that's when we're going to start seeing people just a little bit more interested in soybeans.
So you want to make soybeans great again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, transitioning from that, one of the ways that we have to do that with soybeans is if you don't measure it, you're not going to. So, talking about soil testing, Brad, you're kind of the expert when it comes to soil testing. What are your thoughts for going into the 2024 season?
Well, it's really interesting. This year, and again, it kind of goes back to being in those dry, stress type environments, you learn things. And one thing we really learned this year is how important it is to have sulfur out there. Repeatedly, we've had issues around fields that weren't either putting on proper ears, or we weren't seeing the pollination that we should see, or we were seeing other issues. And a lot of it goes back to a lack of sulfur. Sulfur is one of those nutrients that, even though it's not considered a macronutrient, it really should be in today's environment. You think back over the decades, we used to get a lot of that sulfur through our rainfall. Well, we cleaned up the air, that source of sulfur is gone. And it just doesn't seem like we pay a lot of attention to it. The other issue there is that sulfur is leachable in the sulfate form. And so while we may have soil sampled in the fall and I look good, you don't know what the weather's going to do between now and May when the crop's going to start to use it again. If you have a really wet spring or you have an excessive snowfall event through the winter months, the snow melt is going to have to go somewhere. It moves that sulfur out of that root zone. So at the end of the day, the crop next year is going to start to show some sulfur deficiency type symptomologies, right?
Well, I've got an example for you. I got a call to go down and look at a field. He was taken out for silage. It was over by Rockwell City. And I mean, the ears were 3-4 inch size. And basically when we started talking, we talked about the symptomology of the way the plants looked all season. And I said, do you have a recent soil test on sulfur? The most recent that he had on soil test was 2020. And the sulfur levels were far below. They were in the 2 parts per million range. And I said, okay, have you done any sulfur applications in the last 4 years? And the answer was no. So we went from there. So here it leads into 4 years ago for a soil sample, and the levels were so low. So what should we be doing with sampling in the first place? Do we do it every 4 years, or what?
Well, that's a good question. A question that I've had a number of times this year. And I think if you go back and look historically, that's been our standard operating procedure. We take our soil samples in the fall so we can just decide how many pounds of nutrients, how many pounds of phosphorus, potassium we need to apply this fall for next year's crop based on our yield goal. A couple things to think about. First of all, if you've been in that area that's been really dry, especially in our part of the world, and you take soil samples in the fall under those dry conditions, chances are your potassium level is going to read low, lower than it probably really is. Well, the issue there becomes if you then take that number and based on your yield goal make a recommendation and put together an application plan, you go out and apply it, you may over-apply a nutrient, potassium in this case, which, although it sounds hard to believe, can happen, but you start to get things out of balance, right? So you think of the phosphorus potassium ratio, we want to be about 4-to-1 right there. And that's one of the issues I have with soil sampling in the fall, especially under dry conditions, right? The other part, when you think about sulfur, we talked about it just a few minutes ago. I take my sample in the fall, my number looks good, but I don't know what the weather's going to do for the next 6 months. If I get a lot of moisture in that field, whether it's spring rains or snow melt, that number may not be accurate come next spring. So I'm putting my 2024 crop in thinking I'm good. Well, reality is I may not be. And today there are so many options out there. We've got technology. There are a lot of really good apps out there. You can take your yield data from the combine. You can take your APH and add 15 or 20% to that number. That's a good number to work with. That will give you a better idea of how many pounds of P, K, sulfur, manganese, copper, boron, zinc do I need to apply for next year's crop. The benefit I see there is by using the technology, and whether it's your yield data or your APH plus a certain percentage you feel comfortable with for a yield goal, you can not only get your macronutrients and secondary nutrients, but you'd also get an idea of how many pounds of each nutrient the stover and the grain is going to take out. Right. So you can go ahead and make an application plan and get it done this fall in a more timely fashion because you don't have to wait for the soil test results to come back. The other benefit to doing that in the fall, using the tools, the apps, the technology, and actual yield data is I can build that plan out based on what the grain and stover removal is, but then go into that field and do my soil sampling in the spring. I take a lot of that weather variability out of the equation, and then I can fine tune it. I know I'm going to be making applications across that field, whether it's a first pass herbicide program, a second pass herbicide program, a fungicide application type program where you can fine tune it and not have the concern or worry about is my number correct because Mother Nature gave me too much or too little rainfall. We've got some great products out there. When I think about a lot of the soil tests that I see come across my desk, about 40% of our acres are actually soil sampled. And out of that 40%, probably only 20% are actually getting complete soil test analyses. So even though we took a sample this fall, we just got the basic soil test analysis and we don't have any idea where we're at for boron, copper, sulfur, zinc, manganese. So we've got products on the shelf. When I take that app and I take that yield data, I plug it in, I know how many pounds I need to hit my yield goal for not only my primary, but my secondary, my micronutrients. every pound of fertilizer going out, you could easily meet most, if not all, of your boron and your copper and your manganese and zinc levels with a product we have called ProCoat. We have some other products on the shelf that have both a mix of sulfate form sulfur and elemental sulfur. And so when I look at soil testing in the fall and I look at some of these numbers we're seeing, especially under the dry conditions, you're probably going to see some inflated magnesium levels. Your base saturation magnesium gets over 20%. That's usually an indication there's a drainage issue. That didn't just happen. That happened over time. Well, one of the advantages of putting out sulfur, especially the sulfate form of sulfur in the fall, is that sulfur will combine with magnesium to form magnesium sulfate, which we know as Epsom salts. And once you get a product into a salt form like that, then it can be moved out of that profile. It can be moved through the profile with moisture. And I think those are just a few things to kind of think and keep in mind. S10 is a great product we have that can help mitigate some of those high magnesium levels if you want to try and get that water infiltration rate improved. Soil sampling in the fall has always been kind of the way we've done it, but I think there are tools and technologies out there that we can adapt to help us get better at moving that bar to the next level. How do you manage it if you take soil samples in the fall and you have no micronutrient readings on that soil test? You don't know where you're at, you don't know what to apply at that point. So those are some recommendations.
As we wrap this up, I want to go back to soybeans and the fact that I recall that probably 5 to 7 years ago, the Illinois Soybean Association wanted to help individuals get to that 80 to 100 bush level. And the first thing they did was they went pretty aggressively with soil sampling every 2 years instead of every 4 years. And then the second thing they did is they fertilized soybeans as a crop to make it interesting. And so I think we'll go into maybe even a little bit deeper dive when we do our winter meetings, because we're going to talk about fertility with soybeans first. We're going to talk about how do you fertilize to get to 80 bushels. Then we're going to talk about the genetics, and we'll highlight peaking. You're going to hear peaking a lot. And then we'll talk about stress management coming out of our new facility in Boone. We're going to have acre edge products that will benefit soybeans as well. And so I really think to help individuals really get excited about beans, we got to get to 80 bushels, and then it's going to be exciting for everybody. Because, Brad, we both know individuals that plant beans because they just have to from a rotational standpoint, but really they love corn. And I think the difference has been, you look at where corn yields are today versus where soybean yields are. Soybeans just haven't kept up. Individuals that are getting 55, 60 bushels, and they've been getting 55 or 60 bushels for the last 10 to 15 years, that just doesn't do it. 80 to 85 will do it. So,
Well, and don't forget, in one of our soybean trials that we ran at Farnaville, we had 82 and 82.3 bushel an acre beans in certain treatments. So we're there. We're seeing some real promise with some products that we're looking at that I really think are going to get us to that next level.
And that was a field that Mr. Lemke on purpose wanted to shoot for those types of yields. And so you look at that field, it was about a 30-acre field that went 80 bushels. The area probably averaged 59. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I think we'll wrap it up here on the agronomy segment. Really appreciate everyone who takes the time to listen, because our whole purpose here is to help you get better yields and to give you the observations that we're seeing in the growing season. But now it's when the data comes in, and Brad, you do a great job on data analysis, and so it's going to be fun to present the information as we get it, and to do a follow-up with winter meetings. So thanks, guys, for paying attention to this section.
You bet. Thank you.